Hey, what's up YouTube? Thought I would put together this really quick video here. This is something that I've been asked a few times, and I know you're probably looking for this weekend, what with the release of Star Wars Legion, and that is how to paint a Stormtrooper. So there are already some excellent videos on how to paint a Stormtrooper, and they all boil down to about the same thing, and they're excellent videos. So while I'm not going to 100% recreate what they're doing, I have a slightly different take on the matter, and I'm going to try to teach you how to do this in a, I guess, in a more production type manner. So here's an example one that Stormtrooper that I finished, and they're very fast. So I didn't do the basing yet, but yeah, here's one example of a Stormtrooper, and I'm going to show you some of the steps, some of the more important steps that you take when you are painting a Stormtrooper. So one of the first things I tell people is, if you're going to do a mass set of this, an airbrush helps quite a bit. You don't absolutely need an airbrush though, so I'm going to give you a couple of options what you can do without an airbrush. And right now we're past sort of what I call the spray stage of painting here. So you can see this is a primed Stormtrooper, but there's a key difference here, a couple of key differences, okay? So one is I do a zenithal prime when I'm doing these. So that usually means you spray the whole thing black, and then you spray white down at an angle, focusing on towards the top of the model. And so that's what I did here. And so you can see, it's still very, very white. You normally a zenithal prime might not look, it might look a little more variegated than this. But anyways, so I do that, and a lot of other people do that. You can do that with spray cans, but it's a much better control to do that with an airbrush. Now, one of the other things I do that might be a little bit different than what other people are doing is at this stage, I will go ahead and seal the model with a gloss sealer. Okay, it's a little bit different than how other people do it, and I'll explain that in a minute. So I seal it with a gloss sealer, and now what I want to do is I actually want to bring out the detail of all the armoring, get all of that in, and get it to stand out, right? So what most people do is they'll take a wash, like they'll take a Nuln oil or something, and they'll prime the model white, take a Nuln oil, and then basically dry brush or paint their way back up to the white plates towards the top of the model. And that's a fantastic way to go, especially if you don't have access to an airbrush, or you don't use two different kinds of spray primer. So, but in this case, I went ahead and did that. Then I hit it with the gloss sealer. Okay. Now here's the step that is a little bit different. So instead of Nuln oil, I make up a very different type of wash for this. Okay, and what I use is I use P3 Armor Wash. Okay, and this is a really interesting wash. It's you can use Nuln oil, and Nuln oil is fine, but what I noticed with P3 Armor Wash is that it has a lower surface tension than Nuln oil. It's got a lot of flow improver in it. That reduces the surface tension, and you want that, okay? Because you want the wash to get into the cracks and crevices of the model, and you don't want it sitting and pooling on top of the model. So there's two steps here. So we're going to modify this to wash it, but you remember I hit it with a gloss coat, and the reason why I hit it with a gloss coat is, again, I want to reduce the surface tension of the liquid that's about to go on it. So this liquid that's already a low surface tension should hit this, and then it should be easy to just kind of find its way into the crevices here. I'm going to do that do another modification to my armor wash, in that I'm going to mix my armor wash in about a 1-to-1 ratio, sometimes 2-to-1 depending on what I want, and I'll mix that with a couple of things. So 1-to-1 ratio with glaze medium, and then I'll even add some flow improver to it. So can't find my bottle of flow improver. There it is. So I'm using a Reaper flow improver, and these are great too. So I would do basically armor wash 1-to-1 ratio with glaze medium, and then like you usually don't need a lot of flow improver, but actually I use about 3, maybe even 4 drops of flow improver here. And again, the idea is I want to make a a liquid that's extremely thin and has a very high surface tension. Okay, so that's what I've mixed up here, and I got it in my wet palette, and I'm just going to go ahead and start applying this to the model. And as I apply it to the model, you can see that see how it already hit. It's already sitting right there in the crevices, and it's not really pooling on the top. The other advantage you can see is that because it's a glaze, I can just keep pushing it around. Okay, and what you'll want to do is adjust this ratio to get, as dark or as light as you want. You can see I'm moving that to give myself a little bit of shadow there. And what's different also about this glazed medium is that, if you just use Nuln Oil, if you just use a wash, there is a very high tendency to stain the model where you've left too much, essentially too much wash. Okay, so you can see, like, if I left that there and that was Nuln Oil, that would already have stained. But I can pick up anything I want, especially around the raised areas, and just remove it. Like right here, if I don't want that, I can remove it. Okay, and you can do a couple of layers of this. Bear in mind that because you're using glazed medium, it's going to take a little bit longer to dry, but that's okay because you're doing this. You're going to do this a little more carefully than I'm doing it here. But you can see, you can see how if you get it really thin, it's really pretty easy, right? It really just wants to run right into those crevices, right where you want that outline to occur. It's going to go right there. Okay. So I'm going to do this on a few different models. And just remember to soak up whatever is pooling. Unless you don't, you don't have to be 100% clean with this either, because it can look like weathering too if you leave some of it on there. It's not the end of the world if you leave some of it on there. But the idea is you can see that the model is still very, very white when you do this. And it's because we're using the kinds of liquids that are very, very low surface tension. Okay, so I'm going to do a few of these, and I'll be right back. I'm going to let them dry and show you guys the next step. Okay, everyone, so it looks like this is about dry. So the next step is I'm going to go ahead and paint in all of those black details on the model. So I'm going to paint the gun in. I'm going to paint the eye sockets, the top of the helmet, and we're going to do this really quick. This is just Vallejo model color black gray. And yeah, we're done with the hard part, if I'm being honest with you. This is the rest of this is pretty straightforward. So like I said, so we're going to do this super quick here. You can see, like, there's some finer areas, like the little crevices in the helmet, but it's not, because the armor wash did what it was supposed to do. I don't really need to go in there unless it didn't quite fill it in and I want it darker. But otherwise, you can see what I'm doing here, and I'm just going to get these like areas here in between where, like, kind of like where the, you know what I mean, where the armor plates, where there's a gap in the armor plates and you need to do black there. But I don't do actual black. I do Vallejo black gray because it's a nice, it's kind of a nicer color there. It's not as harsh as like pure black would be. And like so right there, it looks like I missed a spot, so I can just hit it. And you can see the black gray actually blends pretty well with the rest of this. Okay. And you see I made a little bit of a mistake there. It's not the end of the world, okay? We're just kind of cooking here just so that you guys can see a really fast example, okay? So there may be a couple of areas left, but I think we're good here. So now the final step here is really just sort of a super highlight, okay? So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take some Vallejo model color white, and I'm going to mix that. I'm going to thin it down with some glaze medium. And I'm going to do about a little bit less than a 1-to-1 ratio. So a little more paint and then a little less glaze. And I'm just going to apply it as a top level highlight, right? Just to pull out the areas of the model that where it should be lightest. So you can see I'm just doing this live, and because it's a glaze medium, it's going to leave, it'll stay open longer. It'll leave a softer edge. It's not going to look rough like a dry brush will. And I'm going to hit particularly the tops of the armor, parts where parts that are really raised, really hard edges. And if I need to, I can feather it out. It's not a big deal because, again, because it's glazed medium. Right? You can see how quickly you can move through. Right? And what this is doing is you are basically highlighting the hard edges against the darker washed areas, and it's forcing that contrast. And the other thing is, what I like about this is you don't do the entire model, and the reason why you don't is because you have a zenithal prime on there, so you want these shadowy parts of the model to look darker. You want the top parts of the armor to look lighter. And with this method, you have full control. If you have a detail airbrush, you could do this as well. I've done it with a detail airbrush before. I don't think that it necessarily saves you any time to do that unless you're really, really good. Or unless you're doing like a single large piece, it would probably help rather than getting engaged in all this tedium here. But you can see what I'm doing. I'm just kind of picking off the edges. And frankly, this is about done. I mean, this is pretty much where it's going to be by the time we finish painting the basing and everything. But yeah, that's about it. That's as quick as it gets, man. That's what we're looking at, right? So there's that one. There's this one that I did earlier. So you can see, really simple. You know, if you want to do weathering or battle damage or anything, now's the time to do it. Yeah, but they're super fast, as you can see. And it boils down to, again, the key thing here is priming white. I like the zenithal prime because it's going to leave some of that shadowing, leave some of the weathering in there, and then also the P3 armor wash, the reduced surface tension. If you use a glaze or an ink or a shade and you don't mix it with the glaze medium, you run the risk of staining, and you run the risk of it being too high of a surface tension and pooling up on there. All right, so that is going to do it for this video. I want to thank everyone for watching. Hope this helps you guys because, you know, hopefully this will help you get those Stormtroopers on the board faster. And again, if you have any questions, go ahead and leave them in the comments. So I want to thank everyone for watching, and we'll catch you on the next one.